The goal, right? We're now recording. The goal for today is to a discussion around creating a coalition of progressive values in Cambridge. And some of the sub goals are to review some potential issues to be covered on a progressive platform in Cambridge for both the city council and the school committee. Um, to learn a bit about what it's going to take to win elections in Cambridge, and to hear from a representative from the Working Families Party about tools and resources that they offer for progressive organizing on a municipal level. And then we'll have a discussion and hopefully it'll go very well. I hope that's okay with everyone. So without further ado, we'll jump right into the discussion. I will pass it to Carolyn for the platform. What issues should we be organizing around?
So hi, I'm Carolyn, she, her. I'm with our Revolution Cambridge, Cambridge Housing Justice Coalition, and the Heart Coalition. And my task is to give you a little bit of background on our Revolution Cambridge and our platforms, and then I'm going to talk about our most recent City Council platform. Then I'm going to turn it over to Drew King, who's going to talk about our school committee platform. This is all in the spirit of what issues might bring Cambridge progressives together. So in terms of our Revolution Cambridge, for those who don't know, we came out of the political revolution ignited by the Bernie 2016 primary campaign. We're an affiliate of National Our Revolution and Our Revolution Massachusetts. At this point, our main organizing work focuses on housing, education, and support of Cambridge Heart. We do a lot of our work in coalitions or in partnership or support of other groups, and some of those groups in recent years have included the Black Response, the Cambridge Housing Justice Coalition, the Cambridge Heart Coalition, the Cambridge Residents Alliance, Cambridge Education Association, NAACP, Cambridge Retired Educators, and more. So we have a very coalitional approach to organizing. We've been endorsing local candidates and working with the ones we help elect since 2017. Our electoral practice has evolved over time. We endorse and work with electeds on both city council and school committee. So one key piece of our endorsement process is the collective development of a detailed platform focused on issues we expect to be relevant in the next council or school committee term. We ask candidates who want our endorsement to indicate that they're in substantial agreement with our platform and to explain any disagreements. We only consider candidates who substantially agree and where the disagreements are ones we can live with. So we're talking to you today because the Black Response thought we could use information about the content of our platforms as an example to start a conversation about what issues might bring progressives in Cambridge together into a powerful electoral force. So there are no assumptions in what I'm presenting about where that conversation will end up, just something concrete to get everybody started thinking. So having said that, let me just say a couple of things to frame the discussion of the city council platform. We see Cambridge's past and present policies as too often placing the needs of corporations, including real estate developers, universities, and the biotech industry, over those of residents, especially the most marginalized. One result has been displacement of low and moderate income residents, including many residents of color. We support policies and practices for housing, jobs, education, and social and environmental justice that will keep low and moderate income people in Cambridge. We want people most affected by policies to be at the table when they are considered and decided upon. So that's a little bit of background. And if we could start the next slide. What I'm going to share with you is a series of platform planks and a couple of brief examples of each. At the end of our presentations, we're going to share the full platform with people who'd like to dive in deeper. So again, this is in the spirit of thinking about what issues might bring Cambridge progressives together. So the first piece of our platform says housing is a human right. A great deal of our work right now is about housing. We're working to end displacement and provide more affordable housing to low and moderate income residents. We're working to support and initiate a social housing pilot in support of municipal housing vouchers, tenant protections, homes for the unhoused, and more. all of this is and more. So if I could have the second bullet. Okay. One of our key principles is money out of Cambridge politics. So we only support candidates who do not accept developer, corporate, or police organization donations. Next bullet, please. We're very passionate about re-envisioning public safety. We support Cambridge Heart, community-led crisis response. We support demilitarizing the police department, strengthening our sanctuary city statute to prevent formal and informal coordination with ICE, and more. All of these are and more. Next bullet, please. We are very deeply concerned to empower Black, Brown, and other underrepresented people. And in terms of how this plays out in concrete examples, we have worked through the Cambridge Housing Justice Coalition to try to add affected community members to the board of the Affordable Housing Trust and other relevant boards. And we expect counselors to use their role to center the voices of these groups in all deliberative processes. Next point, please. We're committed to making Cambridge a more democratic city. We support changes to the city charter to strengthen the voices of residents in decision-making. We believe in revising the budget process to allow for more public and council input before it's finalized and adopted. We want to see municipal broadband and more. Next bullet, please. We want to develop a livable city and combat global warming. And this includes concretely developing and strengthening Cambridge's Green New Deal, supporting free, expanded, and reliable mass transit, providing safe access for all pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers to needed goods and services. Next bullet, please. We believe labor rights are human rights. We support the efforts of unions within Cambridge to obtain livable salaries, strong benefits, and optimal working conditions. The main way that's been actionable in Cambridge over the last few years is working with the Cambridge Education Association, and Drew will talk about that more in a little while. Next bullet, please. Tax fairness. We support a number of measures to make taxation fairer in Cambridge. One of them is state legislation to enable the city to receive payment in lieu of taxes pilot at a much higher rate than now exists. And last on my list is we support universal full-day free kindergarten and universal after-school programs. Cambridge is very happily, Cambridge has adopted free universal pre-K, but it in many cases doesn't cover an 8-hour day everywhere. And we also believe the council should work towards free universal after school for K-8 programs. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Drew.
There we go. Thanks so much, Carolyn. Big shout out to Stephanie, Virginia, Andy, the whole team that put this together. I'm a proud graduate of Cambridge Public Schools. Steffi and I went to Cambridge and Latin together. We know each other since we were, 15 or 16. And I saw the incredible movement that emerged out of the George Floyd movement and turned into the Heart Coalition. It was very inspiring. And I'll just note that, this is one of the few progressive groups that really has a focus on local education politics in the school committee. And we know public education is such a critical battleground right now. And the right-wing conservative movement has capitalized on that, right? That's why they run school committee candidates, and they're targeting, school committees with, hundreds of anti-critical race theory legislation proposals and so on and so forth. So progressives really need to be organizing around the broad public education constituency, which builds across geography, race, and class. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, I grew up in Cambridge. I benefited from the incredible resources Cambridge has to offer, high quality instruction, heterogeneous classrooms, project-based learning. But I witnessed many low income and Black and brown peers and classmates being marginalized, over disciplined, lacking the support they need. And many of the poverty and racism and housing injustice outside the classroom, gentrification and displacement really affects inequality inside our school classrooms. So schools can play one role, but we really need a multi coordinated approach, and we have to break out of our silos. The Cambridge school population has grown. I'm gonna spend a little more time on this slide, just throwing out a few figures. Cambridge school enrollment has grown by 20%, while at the same time, Black students in Cambridge have decreased by 20%. And Stephanie, me, and others who grew up here, we saw it. Hundreds of students disappeared, gone. So, students of color, English language learners, students with disabilities still face major disparities in progressive Cambridge, regardless of the strides we've made and all the resources we invest. Major disparities in math and reading, access to AP courses, graduation rates, exclusionary discipline. In 2023, only 24% of African American students and 35% of Latino students were proficient in math, compared to 69% of their white middle class peers in Cambridge. And even, the school to prison pipeline, Black students were still suspended at 3 times the rate of white Cambridge students. And studies show that one single out of school suspension in 9th grade can double a kid's chances of dropping out. And we know this education inequality translates into gaps in college completion and housing and job post-education and income inequality. That's why 80% of Cambridge adults have a bachelor's degree, compared to just 1/3 of our Black Cambridgian community members. So we want a strong vision for anti-racist education, increased recruitment and retention of educators and ESPs of color. This is another issue tied to housing. When there's unaffordable housing, it's another barrier, for teachers of color to stay in the city, for our powers to get paid a living wage. The city could provide a housing subsidy to recruit more teachers of color. We want an anti-racist curriculum at all grade levels, so students can see all their various histories and cultures reflected in the curriculum. We want robust outreach and family engagement supports for families of color, to treat them as equal partners in school governance, which the district has a history of not doing. We want to expand, wraparound services to meet the social, emotional, physical, and health needs, and to address poverty-related barriers to all our students so that they can thrive. Next slide. We think a central driver of this inequity, of course, statewide, has been the MCAS high-stakes testing system, which for 2 decades has narrowed the curriculum. Despite all the rosy promises, it failed to close opportunity achievement gaps. It's a very narrow measure of child intelligence and progress. It's perpetuated education inequality by race, language, income, and ability. So, we think progressives need a platform to staunchly oppose MCAS, as many did during the historic Yes on 2 victory, which many of you were a part of. The Yes on 2 campaign has now removed the MCAS graduation requirement. We want to oppose any use of these narrow standardized test scores for our teacher evaluations. And we really want to promote a next generation alternative holistic assessment system for Cambridge that looks at much more comprehensive measures of school quality, including school climate, family and community engagement, and so on and so forth. Next slide. Another important one has been the need to really increase and expand deep family and community engagement and collaborative decision-making in all levels. For the last 5 years or more, since the pandemic, we've seen a very top-down approach from the school administration, top-down decision-making that has disrespected and excluded the real experts in our students' education, of course, which is our educators, caregivers, and students themselves. There's been a lack of transparency and opportunities for participating in the budget process. We think the city needs to establish a much more participatory school budgeting process that's democratic and inclusive. This is what the CEA leaders have come together in a very inspiring recent movement to join hands with caregivers from across the city to promote a more participatory planning and visioning for a school budget that will actually meet students' needs and all families' needs. We want more infrastructure to improve outreach to marginalized families and provide meaningful leadership opportunities and relational trust to foster that collaborative school governance. So that's been a part of the new People's Budget platform. This is one of the coalitions we're involved in, and Chris and Dan and others on this call are part of, and I've been leading, and to really elevate and center the voices of the most underrepresented stakeholders across the district. You can go to the next slide. Supporting our educators, labor rights is key. Supporting strong educator wages, benefits, and working conditions. Supporting the fight for a fair contract. I mean, our teachers unions have been at the vanguard of progressive movements across the country, and rightfully so. So we've always upheld this plank in our platform that we need to support efforts of the CEA to obtain excellent benefits and salaries, working conditions, that educator working conditions are students' learning conditions. So again, this is about breaking down those silos and pushing a framework of common good bargaining, right? That, the way to retain high quality educators and staff in our district to serve students and to address inequities in our school system, you have to treat educators as professional, knowledgeable workers and compensate them justly. We support providing a living wage for ESPs and paraprofessionals. Again, tied back to the housing, so many of Cambridge teachers can't afford to live in this city. So we always connect education justice to housing justice. And I think there are similar trends in other places across the country. You can go to the next slide. And then this is just a very important principle that, public education is one of the last public institutions that the corporate elite haven't privatized. I think that many in the progressive movement have known this, and this is why it's such a key battleground and space for us to organize. We believe, of course, that every child has a right to a fully funded, high quality public education. So we oppose efforts to divert public school dollars towards charter schools and for-profit education consultants. There's been a lot of that in recent years in the district, of the administration hiring external, private consultants when they could be consulting the expertise of educators and parents. And Cambridge should build on strong, bold, universal programs, build on the universal pre-K initiative, as Carolyn said, to make it free, cover the 8-hour day. We want to work with others towards building a free universal after-school program in this city. There's no reason a rich city like Cambridge shouldn't have universal after-school, and other comrades on this call and DSA and stuff have championed this initiative and trying to get more pilot dollars from Harvard to fund universal after-school. And we want to support full and equitable funding of the Student Opportunity Act to really provide adequate staffing and interventionists in all our classrooms and provide the holistic supports our students need to thrive. I think that's it for now.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn and Andrew. Really important things. This is an opportunity for us to check in and ask some clarifying questions of Andrew and Carolyn. Feel free to raise your hand, your virtual hand, so I can see you and call on you. And you can also drop your questions in the chat. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Did we miss anything? That's really important. Oh, Carolyn, go ahead. There's a
I
staff.
just want to say, I think I just want to say, I don't think Drew mentioned, but he was an almost successful school committee candidate in the last election cycle, lost by a couple of votes,
Oh
and
yeah, I forgot about that.
we're extremely proud of him, and he basically ran on our platform. So you can tell how well versed he is in it from his presentation. That's it.
Absolutely. I was really
All right.
excited to run this platform. And we got Chris, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank thank you all for inviting me to this and for doing this. I guess my piece of context and then my question, like the context is that the CEA has been doing a similar process of coming up with like what are our priorities and then endorsing candidates specifically for school committee. Um, we will likely be doing that again this election season in November or in the lead up to November. And hope that we can expand it beyond school committee. But I also think there's value in thinking beyond just endorsement and thinking about who might run and even having a slate. And so I'm you know, through the Solidarity Squad, I think there's an interest there around that idea. And I'm curious if that's a conversation that that you all have had yet, or if it's mostly been focused around the question of endorsing candidates.
I think, Chris, this is just the I think folks on this call will be very open to that discussion. I think this is just a preliminary discussion with new groups. And that and that's the purpose of bringing you here to you can hear about the Solidarity Squad. What Chris is talking about is a new coalition of educator leaders and families who are organizing around a more transparent and responsive school budget process. Um, but I don't know if Stephanie others want to say more.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a little bit further along. Today we brought a bunch of different groups together, and the idea is to introduce some of the ideas that folks are interested in organizing around, and then gauge interest in developing such a coalition. And hopefully, this means you're interested in working with all of us, Chris. There was another question in the chat from Lee. I'm guessing this is also to you guys, Carolyn and Andrew. Could you mention results of endorsements based on on the ORC platform?
Do you want to do school committee? In this last election cycle, we've had different results in different election cycles. In the last election cycle, the only person that we endorsed who got elected was Jeevan Sabrina Wheeler. We've done better in the past, but I'm assuming you're asking about the more recent election cycle. And we had, it's a slightly more complicated situation on the school committee side. So Drew, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think we cast the net a little broader on the school committee endorsements, but I mean we had good people. We endorsed Rachel Weinstein, David Weinstein, Jose Luis, myself, and Richard Harding. And I lost. I think the others got elected. I lost, but it was close. I think with our proportional representation system, when you take real bold positions, I think I was taking some of the boldest positions on like the MCAS test, which was sort of like a wedge issue. So, I think there was a very specific constituency that appealed to, but maybe others not so much so. So we're constantly figuring out ways to how to reach different sectors of the Cambridge electorate without watering down our platform or our message too much. That's a half-baked thought. I have to think more about how to answer that.
To help us transition a bit, I think that is the reason why we're here today. We want to have a better impact on this coming election, and we wanted to get a head start. So we'll transition into what it takes to win elections in Cambridge. I want to say that I put this together. Um, I'll probably end up sending it out to folks because the text is going to be quite small. All right. So what does it take to win an election in Cambridge? Next slide. So what I'll try to do is give some general information about Cambridge, and then give the candidate/campaign perspective, then go into 501c4 social welfare organizations and their perspective, and then move on to 501c3 nonprofits, their perspectives. Next slide. So here's some basic information that we should all have, which is, in order for a candidate to be eligible to run for city council or school committee, they must be a registered voter in Cambridge. They have to be at least 18 years old by the date of the election. They obviously have to be a US citizen, and they have to reside in the city of Cambridge. In order to get on the ballot, they need to have over 50 certifiable signatures. So it just means that they need to collect the paperwork from the Election Commission and then collect at least 50, but it's preferable to get 100 just in case somebody has signed multiple paperwork, or someone's registration is not up to date. And then Cambridge has this ranked choice voting, which is really complex, but for the purpose of this conversation, you need to get roughly 10% of the vote in order to have to win an election. Next slide. So according to the Cambridge Public Health Database, the population is about 117,000. That excludes student populations, which can swell the city up to about 50,000, about 40,000 extra people a year. But this is the voting population in Cambridge, so that's where we are. And the voter turnout really, it depends. It varies between 30 to 60% of the population, but we should always keep ourselves in the sort of lower end, especially if it's not a major national election year. Right. So you need to get 10% of the votes, but basically, if you could identify 7,000 people to vote for you, you'll win. And because of the ranked choice system, you ideally want to sway people to vote for you, number one, but you can also encourage people to vote for you, number 2 or 3. And this can get you up to the 10% that you need. Next slide. I thought this was interesting. So this is a map of the wards in Cambridge. If you look at the voter turnout by wards and precincts, you can see that some of the highest turnout wards include, let's see here, 47% in Ward 9, so that's West Cambridge. 48% in Ward 10, again, West Cambridge. So some of the wealthiest parts of Cambridge have the highest voter turnouts. And that's something for us to consider because their interests are getting met. And it's really important for us to turn out the votes in other parts of the city. Let's just say these are some of the least densely populated areas in the city. And wards 5, 4, 7 are some of the more densely populated areas in the city, which makes it it's a little bit tougher to consider, but this is the work that we need to do to turn out the vote in the lower income neighborhoods in the city. Okay, next slide. So from the candidate's perspective, what we need to consider is that a candidate will have a campaign office, and that campaign office will have a campaign manager. They'll have a field director if they're a wealthy campaign. Sometimes the campaign manager is the field director. They might also have a communications person. That's ideal. They definitely have a fundraising coordinator, and they'll also be seeking lots of volunteers. And the volunteers probably do the most work in addition to the campaign managers. They're looking for people to go knock on doors, make phone calls, do visibilities, et cetera, et cetera. The campaign might work with communities in various ways. So they'll do community engagement to try to connect with different groups all around the city. They'll craft their policy positions and their platforms. They'll do voter outreach by reaching out on different channels, doing social media, community events, etc. They'll obviously need to fundraise, so they'll be calling all of you, asking you for money, and then obviously mobilizing volunteers to do all of this work. Next slide. So it's really important to talk about which organizations can work with different campaigns, the candidates, with the candidates, and what their limitations are. So the 501c4, the social welfare organizations, a 501c4 organization can engage in political activity, but there's obviously some strict rules that they have to follow. So I wanted to bring them up. Next slide. 501c4s can promote their missions. They can conduct voter registration drives, get out the vote efforts, produce and distribute voter education materials, but they can't be partisan, so they can't identify a party. They can't raise funds in the same exact way, but this is really important, an important distinction that needs to be made. I'm going to go ahead and, because I'm hitting my time, I'll go ahead and go to the next slide quickly. All right, cool, thanks. Right, so they can't coordinate directly with any individual candidate. They can't make direct contributions to the candidates in their campaigns. Yeah. And they might lose their tax exemption status if they break any specific campaign finance laws. All right, cool. Next slide. 501c3s. We are fiscally sponsored. TBR is fiscally sponsored by 501c3. So I just want to point that out. So this sort of limits what we're able to do. But a 501c3 is a nonprofit organization. And so we have very strict limits in terms of what we can do regarding political activity. Next slide. Right. So we can engage in voter education and support get out the vote efforts. Again, as long as they're not partisan, we can provide voter education materials and encourage people to vote. We can hold candidate forums and debates and events as long as they're neutral. We can publish information and voting guides as long as we don't endorse. So we're not allowed to endorse any candidate. Yeah, we can promote all kinds of relevant issues, and we can publish materials on campaign issues and advocate for specific policies. Next slide. But we can't endorse or publicly oppose or donate to any specific candidate or campaign. The organization cannot, the individuals may if they choose to. We can't coordinate with any campaign in any way. Including sharing data, messaging strategy. Yeah, and we have to stay nonpartisan and neutral publicly, but that doesn't mean we can't do things, right? So what can we do? Next slide. So we can host candidate forums to educate people about the candidates. We can maybe create a forum calendar and encourage community participation. We can develop issue-specific question banks to help voters articulate their concerns. We can gather and publish information on local issues through newspapers, flyers, social media, other platforms. We can promote voter turnout, door-to-door knocking, phone calls, etc. Next slide. What does it take to have an impact? It does take a lot of time to run any kind of campaign, whether it's the candidates campaign or any community organizations. It takes a lot of people to build a campaign. So that's why we're here, trying to see who's interested in getting involved. It takes a lot of money, and it takes infrastructure for being able to gather that money legally. It takes a lot of research to know about the candidates, the issues, the voting population. It takes a plan, and it takes distributing that plan and communicating it properly, and it takes structure and infrastructure to it. All right, that is all. Thank you. I will pass it over to Georgia from the Working Families Party to introduce your work.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Georgia Hollister-Isman. I'm the New England director for the Working Families Party. And I am just going to give like a little bit of an intro about what WFP is in general, and then I'll offer a few things that might be helpful for you all in Cambridge, where we do not have like deep long-term organizing presence. So offer some things that are available to aligned folks working in places where we're not doing as deep organizing as we are in many other places. This first slide is the Working Families Party power building model. And you'll see at the center of it is this idea of governing power. It sounds like this will not be foreign to anybody here, but our goal is not to make a political point, not to be politically righteous, but actually to build the power that we need to run cities and run states of, by, and for working people. Our primary intervention, you'll see at the top, is elections. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to run and win elections at every level. And I think we're quite good at it. So I think that's primarily why I'm here, is to offer some thoughts and insights about that. Our form is a somewhat unusual one where we have different entities, but we're not primarily an advocacy organization or an issue organization. We're a political party, and we aspire to be that. In some places, that's like a legal entity that exists on the ballot. In other places, it's about the work that we do, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we're aiming to be a political home for people with all different kinds of other affiliations, unions, and community groups to come together and do politics together. And our constituency is the multiracial working class. So there are lots of folks who, there are lots of voters out there in the world, but we're focused on the needs and the agenda of working class people, Black, white, and brown. Okay, you can go to the next slide. What we mean by governing power, we believe working people should run this state and this city in this case, but also like specifically not just cities. We think that we should build the power for working people to run states and ultimately the federal government as well. Okay, next slide. That means, this is the great Fannie Lou Hamer, that we need to be serious about running for office and running for all different kinds of things, all the way from school board, all the way up. And one of my favorite things about the Working Families Party is that we're a serious national political force, and we're also very serious about your school committee election. So it's one of the reasons that it's great to be part of WFP. Okay, next slide. Just to say a little bit more about what we mean by the concept of political party, the United States has a very strange system with only 2 political parties. In most other places in the world, there are a lot more political parties. This is a quote from AOC. In any other country, she and Joe Biden wouldn't have been in the same party. You could go to the next slide. You'll see an example there of, I think it's Mexico. That's the Mexican parliament. There are a whole wide variety of different parties, and the governing coalition is made up of a couple of different parties that make a deal and an alliance and a governing coalition with one another. So even when we don't have, and that's actually functionally true of WFP, when we start to build political power, the first thing that happens is we start to be something that's more like these yellow dots or these green dots here. And we start to be able to form a governing coalition and influence governing agendas, even though we don't have a full majority on a city council or in a legislature or something like that. So There is real governing power in having a minority position, and obviously but then you need to figure out how to get to a majority to move anything forward. Okay, great. Next slide. Obviously, political parties are best known for having candidates and elected officials. And in some places in the country, Philadelphia and Hartford are probably the two best examples. There are WFP city councilors. In lots of other places, there are sort of WFP affiliated city councilors who are close to WFP, who carry that banner, but who aren't either the races themselves are nonpartisan as they are in Cambridge, or they're also Democrats. Great. But parties also have and are a lot of other things, and the next slide will show you that. Yes, I see Kendra Broken. Hi, Evan. So our basic definition of parties is that they're people organizing together to win elections around a platform. That is essentially what you all are doing here today. So whether you think about it this way or not, you're engaging in kind of a party-like behavior right here. Parties are also infrastructure. And there are lots of different levels of that. A voter coalition. So we're always trying to create a group of voters who are like, oh, I understand that I want to be with the Working Families Party candidates. That's how I like think about my identity as a voter. They're activists. They're the group of people who show up and knock on doors. They're the leaders who help make decisions and decide what questions we should ask candidates and how our endorsement process should work. They're the data and tech and kind of boring infrastructure that it takes to run campaigns, but it's hugely important. They're the ideology and the sort of political education that helps people understand how those choices are made. Obviously, they're the people running for office and the brand. And then ultimately parties need to have their own money that's distinct from the money flows that go into the two major parties. So in places, even when we're not a party on the ballot, we're striving to act like a party and to do these things for and with aligned folks on the ground. So that's why I'm here today, even though we don't have a permanent presence in Massachusetts, in Cambridge in particular. But I am here to help think with you all about the infrastructure that a party can bring and how that might be helpful. And I am just always delighted to be in a room of people who are thinking about an election close to a year in advance. That's my favorite place to be. So next slide. I want to offer up two things just from my conversation with Stephanie that seemed like they might be helpful. One is a very specific tool, right? Like we have a voter file system. I made this today. This is the people in Cambridge who aren't Republicans who voted in the last municipal election. You can see that you can see the breakdown by age and ethnicity there. You could also use this to make phone calls or cut walk lists or something like that. So this is a tool that WFP we sell to aligned organizations and candidates. So if that is a tool that is, and often because I don't actually know what the rules are about getting the other tools that are more common to the Democratic Party, but sometimes they're prohibitively expensive, and or the Democratic Party like controls them in a way that makes it impossible for folks who are challenging incumbents or not endorsing the people that the establishment are endorsing to use it. So it's a tool that we've developed basically because we needed to have our own tool in order to be really independent. Okay, so that's one. Next slide is Stephanie said that folks were going to be thinking about recruiting candidates. That is a thing we spend a lot of time doing and thinking about. And both I am happy to serve as a resource to you all. And we have a big national training that's coming up next week on recruiting candidates. So I'll ask the tech to put the link in the chat. So anyone who wants to join is welcome to. We would love to have you all. But it's actually the second in a series of trainings. The first was about if you're thinking about yourself as a candidate. That happened last week. But this one is about if you're thinking about trying to recruit somebody else to run for office. And we're trying to do those at this moment in the year where people have some time to figure out what are we doing in the coming election. And I will stop there. I saw some folks were putting things in the chat. Couldn't read them all while you were going. I'm happy to answer questions. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions or thoughts or discussion. And I'll look at the chat and see if there's anything I need to respond to too from that.
Yeah, there's something I need to respond to from Lee. What about PACs? PACs are political action committees. 5 to something. I can't remember exactly. You can create a PAC by incorporating it and registering it with the Federal Election Commission, the FEC. What can PACs do? They can raise money, they can put out messages. They can't directly collude with a campaign, but they can amplify the messaging and the platform and the candidate themselves. I hope that helps. There are a few in Cambridge. I know that CCC has one. I think ABC has one. Do you guys have one, ORC? There are a few in Cambridge. Yep. So I hope that answers your question.
PACs can actually work directly with candidates up to a certain limit, which is pretty low in Massachusetts, but nothing.
I thought it was they can work with candidates, but they can't work with the campaign.
Don't think so.
I need to check that with Virginia, Vanessa. That was my understanding. Thanks for clarifying that, Georgia.
Yeah.
Series A.
Okay. Should I call on people or do you want to, Stephanie?
Yeah, go ahead and call on people.
I see Dan.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the PAC thing a little bit because I think it's really fundamental to the conversation. There's two avenues. There's something called there's a PAC, and then there's an independent expenditure PAC. And the 30-second version of this is that independent expenditure PACs may not coordinate with candidates or campaigns, but they may raise and spend unlimited amounts of money. If you go the PAC route, you're allowed to coordinate with the candidates and the campaigns, but you may only spend $1,000 per candidate. So it's a trade-off between being able to spend as much money as you want, but not being able to coordinate, or being able to coordinate, but only being able to spend $1,000 per candidate. And it's worth clarifying that A Better Cambridge and Cambridge Citizens Coalition are independent expenditure PACs. They spend between $20,000 and $25,000 each on their candidates without coordination. And the Residents Alliance and Our Evolution Cambridge are examples of PACs. They coordinate and spend, no more than $1,000 per candidate. So hopefully that helps kind of clarify. And the last thing I'll say is, like, a group cannot raise or spend money on the election without forming either a PAC or an independent expenditure PAC. So it's not optional.
Can I just add one thing to that, just a strategic consideration? So like that, just to say, if you have plenty of money and you want to spend it on an election, you need an IE PAC. If you don't have a lot of money, but what you do have is a lot of people, then it's much easier to like use volunteers in a coordinated way than in an independent way. So we do both and have both actually. Different things will make sense in different circumstances. Okay, I see Drew.
Chris.
Can you speak briefly to how WFP has gotten many progressives elected and really established governing power through the fusion voting in places like New York, and maybe
Yeah, sure.
contrast that to here where we don't have fusion voting and just
Yeah.
or what am I different scenarios?
Let me say a couple of things about fusion. So fusion voting, for those who don't know, is where a single person, a single candidate, can appear on the ballot as the nominee of more than one party. So Evan, when they were running for rep, could have been, oh, that was in the primary, never mind. But in the general election, you could have someone run as WFP, you could have them run as a Democrat, or you could have them run as both a Democrat and WFP. It functions in general elections, not in primaries. It has allowed WFP to build some significant power because people really do want that like extra in line on the ballot. We have it in Connecticut and in New York. I will say in both of those places, we also run a lot of Democratic primaries because, and we've built lots of power through those too. So WFP exists in 12 different states. And in only 3 of those do we have fusion voting. So fusion voting is a really important tool. We love it. We wish we had it in more places. But it's not the only tool for building progressive power or for building a WFP.
We're going to take one more question and then we're going to transition because we're a little bit behind. But yeah, Chris, go ahead.
My question got answered. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we're going to transition over to the discussion portion of all of this. Before we start the discussion, just some parameters. We've been exercising them, but I just want to repeat them so that we're on the same page. We want to continue to either write stack in the chat or raise your virtual hand, and we'll keep stack in the chat. Please keep yourself on mute. Please only unmute yourself to speak if you've been called on. Don't interrupt anyone or speak over anyone. Be respectful. Don't challenge any individual person. Feel free to challenge ideas. But we're all here. We all have the same general politics, even if there are nuances in our political position or gaps in our knowledge about different types of issues. But we're all here with in the same spirit, we'll say. What does stack mean? It just means add me to the list of names to be called on. And I'll try to call on people based on the order that they raise their hand or write stack in the chat. If someone has spoken many times, I'll probably move someone who hasn't spoken up. So, but I also encourage you to do that. If someone else has needs to speak and hasn't spoken yet and you've spoken, feel free to let the other person speak first. Okay. Cool. So those are some of the parameters of this conversation. I want to encourage everyone to participate. So one of the questions that we had, and I'll put it in the chat, is what do you think about organizing across multiple issues? Some of us come from organizations that are organizing around a single issue, and maybe we haven't been a part of a coalition before. How would we feel? What are the questions and challenges that we should anticipate around organizing around multiple issues?
You mean in sense of running a campaign that puts out multiple issues?
Sorry, Lee had her hand up.
Yeah,
So
I think to win in Cambridge, you have to run on multiple issues. And I think the difficulty is getting a high enough level set of issues to run on, that multiple different groups can agree with that list of issues, and that you can't get too specific about what has to be done about each issue. Otherwise, I think different groups will not agree. And I just want to give an example from the last city council election. I'm a member of both Our Revolution Cambridge and Cambridge Residents Alliance, and I worked with both groups to see if they could have a joint endorsement process. And so we tried to come up with questions that we would ask candidates together, and it didn't work. We couldn't get, even though the two groups are pretty close, we couldn't get close enough on actually executing that. I do think it should be possible, but I think it would take, we were probably already in the late spring by the time we started that. So I think particularly the first time that groups try to do that, it's going to take several or many months to figure out a way to do it. And the other thing is we had differing opinions on sort of the parameters or scope. So the Residents Alliance wanted to keep the parameters to issues that the city council has control over. And Our Revolution Cambridge wanted to include things like Palestine and Gaza, so that if councilors didn't agree to support liberation for Palestine, that they would not be able to be endorsed. Whereas the Residents Alliance thought that's not a key city council issue that the city council has control over. So I'll stop there, but I just want to give that example so people can like get moving quickly into what the dilemmas are. Thanks.
I just want to reiterate the dilemmas. So you tried to work, one organization tried to work with another organization, and the issue, there were some sticking points over some specific issues, and then you weren't able to create a platform. Okay, that's helpful. Matthew, you started to speak. Do you want to go ahead and say what you have to say?
My question was essentially answered by what Lee said.
Okay, great. All right, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. One, so I think there's kind of two issues that we've had up until now, and they're somewhat related. Issue one is simply a timing issue. The groups that we've had up until this point, for multiple cycles now, have not been able, for whatever reason, to issue endorsements until very late in the cycle. We're talking like, I think like mid-September last year. And that's really, really hard because there's just not a lot of time to campaign. And so I think one thing that really needs to happen is that whatever is going on, it needs to start much sooner. It needs to be like less time spent on like making the perfect platform and more time spent on supporting the candidates. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I think it's a really, really confusing to have the Residents Alliance and Our Revolution Cambridge, which are very, very similar in the minds of voters. I mean, I understand the nuances and the differences between them myself, but for the average voter, it's very confusing. And they're both like relatively small groups, and where the double group into the capacity thing and the timing thing, because if you've got two different groups of half a dozen people trying to figure this out, it's confusing. And so I don't necessarily know what the answer to that is, because I know that those two groups really like doing what they do, and there are, and
I feel like I lost you there, but that's a good place. Dan, so what I'm hearing you say is we need to hurry up and just start working, finding out who the candidates are and getting to work supporting the candidates and hitting the ground running. So that's great.
Can you hear me?
Any next? Yeah, but we also moved on. Yeah, I think one of the issues that I see coming up is people not being educated about all of the issues. And so I think part of the work that we need to do is start educating each other about the different issues. So there are some contentious debates in the city right now. So it's really important that we do the hard work of educating one another about the things that matter. And then the other thing is obviously the the process of what can we live with versus what are sticking points and what do we do about that. That's going to be challenging, but I think it's worth engaging with one another on that and figuring out what to do. So yeah, I will pass it to Carolyn.
Okay, couldn't find myself there to unmute. So I just want to raise a technical, I guess it's a quasi-technical issue, that our revolution has come up against in terms of the timing, which is the reason we're always so late, is that people can decide to run very late. And we've had a sense, and it's been true, for instance, in Somerville, I believe, not just in Cambridge, that some of the people who decide to run later might be people who are lower income, less connected to the process. So the challenge then is, if you go ahead, how do you go ahead and start endorsing people when you don't see the whole crowd? And how do you not leave people out who might be the people that you feel the most excited about? So if anybody has an answer to that, I would find that absolutely thrilling, because I do think it's crazy that we have this every single election cycle, and I honestly don't have an answer. You know, I would have to say, as an ORC member, Palestine is extremely important to me. It's hard to imagine giving up on that one. But just saying, I'd like to think we could make an alliance at this point and keep our focus on that. I'm done.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think we should reframe that question a little bit, because I think the real question is, when do you release your endorsements? Because we'll know who will be on the ballot by the end of August. So that technical question is, when they'll submit their list of signatures by the end of July, and then that'll get processed, and then we'll know who's going to be on the ballot. Okay, sorry. Anne. Thank you.
Hi. So my question is really more about, how do you put your principles into action with other people? Say, I'm just skipping over the whole get elected part. I presume that somebody here on this call hopefully will get elected, but what does that look like in action? Oh, that is a little pleasant. Anyway, when
That's
you're
the end of this
working,
question. You can go.
when you're actually working in coalition with other people as part of, for example, a school committee, how do your ethics, how do your principles help you to work with other people who might not share the same ethics and principles? Like, they've got their own strong ones, but can you speak to working effectively within a coalition or within a group of people who don't share like your alignment?
I think it's a really good question. There's a text I read like 100 years ago that I'll try to find. I forget what it's called, but it's about coalitional politics. In the follow-up email, we'll be sure to attach it if I remember to do that. But it's about the struggles of having to do that work, and because we're all fighting for our liberation, you have to, this is the struggle. Right, Rena.
Hi. I know that you did say that we could know who's going to be running by the end of August, but honestly, that's very late. We don't know till the end of July because people can put in their 50 signatures by the end of July, and some people do it at the last minute. And if you have a process where you have to interview people and all of that, it's part of what's built in to the Cambridge system that makes it hard. I sort of feel like that's something maybe we should try and get them to change in the whole process of they're looking at changes to this charter. That's something we should get into the conversation because it really makes it hard. Another thing that makes it hard, which I know proportional representation is hard to talk about right now, but people do not understand proportional representation. And I really feel like a lot of what we have to do each time is letting people, getting people to understand the, bullet voting, team, different groups. And that we could start earlier, that we could start a lot earlier. Also, the percentages that you were given, the last city election was really more like the 34% end. And so how do we get to people who are new to Cambridge or who haven't been locked, even, have any awareness of what the local issues are? Even look at the multifamily housing now. There's a group of people who was involved in it in the beginning, but it's only recently that it's gotten out to the to more people, and still not enough because I've been talking to friends about it and they have no understanding of it still. So I think part of what we could do as a group, as a coalition, is education. And that allows all of the groups to be able to do it, because we can start right in the beginning. These are our issues. We want to talk about low-income people and how it's affected them. This is how Cambridge works in its voting, and really get going on that pretty soon. I'm done.
Thank you, Rena. Yeah, very good point. We're going to add that to the notes. Go ahead, Kathy.
I'm sort of curious with the Working Family Party a little bit. About criteria that you use. How narrow are your political requirements, and also is viability an issue for you? I think for us, this has been one of the things in the Residents Alliance of trying to balance out the notion of viability. Campaign manager, certain amount of money raised. The more viable candidates are not always the most progressive candidates. They are, however, the ones likely to get elected. So there you have that. The issue about endorsements also is if you endorse very narrowly, and like ORC had 1 person elected, Residents Alliance had 4. Then once those people are elected, the ability to work with them is really influenced by whether your group endorsed them or not. So I think that's a tricky thing. And it's, Cambridge used to have 2 endorsing groups, the Cambridge Civic Association and the Independents, which were sort of the liberals and the not liberals. And that created some baskets. And then some of us formed the Cambridge Rainbow Alliance many years ago. And the Cambridge Rainbow was a progressive slate. And in Cambridge, from my point of view, and there's arguments about it, you need to have a slate in order to win. You cannot run as a single person. But with a slate, that means some of those people will win and others will win because of transfer votes. So those are just some other considerations. And sometimes I end up thinking we need to put our time and energy into building grassroots organizations and maybe be less concerned about elections. That's a different point of view.
100% agree. That's a good transition to the next question. What would you need to do? What would you need to do coalitional organizing? And again, do I need to do it? Yes, what would you need? Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
I'm not sure this was responding exactly to that point, but sort of responding to Ann's point about how to build bridges with new constituencies and how can progressives reach more people. I think that's one benefit of having multi-issues. People live multi-issue lives. I think housing policy and education policy cut different ways in Cambridge. I think a lot of housing policies are a lot more polarized. So some people who might not share all our progressive housing policies could still get behind full funding of our public schools. They still want to see their kids succeed in schools. So organizing around public education is clear benefit there that you're um, reaching that very broad political constituency. And just on a quick side note, I mean, I was in New York City when the Working Families Party was really sort of at the zenith of their power back in 2014, and their whole equity agenda under Mayor de Blasio centered on their education equity agenda, and they turned the whole mayoral election into a referendum on Bloomberg's school privatization, market-based reforms, and said, no, we want to center the needs of the whole child. And then through that, the city council and the administration launched the largest universal pre-K initiative in the country, the largest full-service community schools initiative in the country. So it was just an interesting example of how education equity became central to the larger progressive strategy of all the other policy issues. But back to your question, Stephanie. I don't know the answer.
No, you're supposed to ask more questions. Okay, that's up on this issue. Yeah, so what do we need in order to work together is what we're asking. I think some people have put forward some of the challenges, some of the barriers, but what would we need in order to do that? I think I proposed some community education. I heard Rena also specifically, I mentioned issues. Rena talked about like understanding the structure, the way that the city governance works. I think that's really important. Are there any other things that we could talk about in terms of what we would need in order to do this work together? Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully my signal's a little better. But I think the point I was trying to make earlier is directly related to this question. I think it's very confusing for the voters that we have two brands, Our Revolution and Cambridge Residents Alliance. And I think it would be a lot clearer if we were all focused on one group, right? I think what's really hard is that having two groups that are very, very similar with a lot of overlap, making endorsements that end up being different from each other, and neither group spends very much money or does much campaigning, and both groups get overshadowed by the independent expenditure packs that exist in the city. I just think we would be a lot stronger as a movement if we had one umbrella group, one brand, and we were all working together on it. And I believe that it would be very difficult to choose either Our Revolution or CRESA. And so I think what we may need is to make a new group and ask the other two groups to step back potentially. That I think would be the most effective way to move forward. I am not running for office this year,
Interesting.
and a big reason for it is because I don't feel like the current infrastructure on the left is capable of supporting candidates who stay true to the platform, because there isn't enough capacity and there's too much fragmentation into multiple groups. So I would just ask that we really think about that. And I know it's going to be hard because
Yeah.
like people like doing things.
Dan, okay. Okay. That was a lot. Um, I don't even know how to summarize all that. I'm gonna process it first. So I'll pass it to Anne. Go ahead, Anne.
Hi, sorry. Sorry about that. My almost 5-year-old is being pacified by Peppa Pig right now. I needed to. So I was wondering, is there a high level timeline and a high level we think it'd be helpful if you could raise about this much money, here's how you spend it, or here's how it would be spent. Just like a very clear nuts and bolts instructional guide.
So we don't have like a plan and a timeline. We wanted to gauge people's interest in developing that, but it sounds like you're ready to go, Anne, and so you could help us develop that. So I can email you and we could schedule a meeting.
I've been explaining things to people for a little while around here recently. Thanks, Kennedy Longfellow.
All right, I'll pass it to Carolyn.
So I just want to say, I actually think that we do need some kind of larger electoral force. And I saw that Glenna put in the chat, or an umbrella coalition. I don't think we have to get into whether groups have to step back, but I do think we're not going to be effective unless unless we not only come together, but we get more people to turn out than the paltry turnout that we're getting in local elections. And I would say, one thing that gives me hope, Stephanie doesn't know I'm going to say this, but one thing that gives me hope is a role that the Black response might play, and particularly that Stephanie has played in pulling together the Cambridge Housing Justice Coalition. Because I don't know that we all would have worked. Many groups of people decided to work together, partly because Stephanie brought everybody together. And I think that's really significant. So I think, and it might be, I don't know what Dan meant by step back. It might be that instead of individual groups endorsing at a particular, in this cycle, we decided to do some kind of common endorsement. I don't actually know, can't say it's going to work. I can see a million obstacles, but I'm certainly open to that. I'd be interested, for example, to think, was DSA open to that, for example, right? Or other groups that, work in the city open to that? Because, and, can we get something together? And it doesn't, I don't have, anyway, I don't want to, I guess all I'm saying is, I don't think that would be a crazy approach at this point. And if we could pull it off, it might be pretty exciting. My only other angle on this, which is that there are people who are in Medford who are both Our Revolution Medford and Medford DSA, who put together a citywide platform and won most of the city. And Medford is like a much less challenging political environment than Cambridge. But I think it's really would be worth looking at, what was their platform, what were some of the kinds of things they did to get where they got. So those are just my random ideas. But I do think if we had some kind of other force in the city that was electoral, it could also put pressure on councillors in a more effective way once they were elected. So it's not just about the elections. I'm done.
Love all of that. Go ahead, Lee.
Muted.
Lee.
Sorry, thanks. Sorry, I was going to ask about something that Carolyn mentioned, which was DSA, which has endorsed in the past, and I believe has one candidate on the city council, the same as ORC. So although they endorse many more people, and I feel like we should do a little hat tip to Aya, who is here and also ran for council and did extremely well. So just want, in case there's people that weren't around for the last election, I want to mention that about her. And I personally would love for her to run again, but I think she's not sure she wants to, and I can understand that too. So I just wanted to ask what DSA folks are talking about so far, if anything, this year. Thanks.
Henry, will it be quick? Because there is one more question and we only have 4 more minutes.
Right. So I can't answer the DSA question and wouldn't suggest that I should. But I think one strategy to think about is for people, groups to write a platform early in the process, long before the deadline for candidate registration, and to say, we're out looking for candidates. This is our platform. Let us know if you're interested, because we're going to complete the process, and I'm making up the date, by May 1st. And yes, we might lose some candidates, but I think that would really help and address some of the issues that Dan and others have mentioned. And it actually would help because people would be thinking about issues and how to work together early in the process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna not call on you, Drew. The last question is, does anyone know of anybody who's running or of potential candidates? Let's start rumors now. We only have a couple of minutes. Yeah, and I think we're about to be best friends.
I hope so. I could always use more best friends. Yeah, I am gonna run. I have been thinking about it for a little while, and I think it's largely because I want honest people who aren't afraid to say hard things.
That's amazing. Awesome. Oh, I didn't even know we'd have someone here. Does anybody else? Okay. Well, no, Andrew, you have to run again. It's not even a question.
Appreciate you, Stephanie.
Does anyone have any rumors? Go ahead, Carolyn.
I just wanted to know, Anne, which are you running for?
School committee.
School committee, okay. So that seemed really important to know, that's all.
At the moment, it is school. Well, at the moment, it is school committee. I pretty much, yeah, it's school committee. We shall see where other things lie in the far off future, but right now it's school committee.
Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, this is in rumor territory. But I think some of us might have seen the recent op-ed in the Cambridge Day that was written by Abra Berkowitz, Sukia Akiba, and Quentin Zondervan. And Quentin, formerly ran, Sukia also formerly ran and had a lot of passion. And I don't know if anybody has talked to Sukia about potentially running. I think that Abra is also somebody who comes from like an education background, who did not write it off initially when we talked about it. And so I think that Abra is somebody who we could talk to, who might be interested in running, and seemed like open to wanting to learn more, and sort of like didn't a lot of people sort of like knee-jerk reject it. But I just wanted to bring that and make sure that people were aware of that op-ed.
Yeah. There's also a question in the chat for you, Evan. Are you running?
I am organizing in Cambridge all the time, but right now I'm more focused on the vacuum that exists at the state level. But yeah, I'm continuing to do everything that I can.
Let's keep the rumor mills running. Keep sharing if you find anything. So we've just run out of time. It sounds like there's interest, but what I'd like to do is drop a Google form in the chat. If you're interested in forming a coalition and working together, we'd like you to complete this form and let us know how, your capacity, your interest, and let's start working on this together. So thank you all for coming today. Really excited. It sounds like there's energy. Anne is ready to go. So let's follow her lead. And also, if you wouldn't mind completing TBR survey. I'll drop the link in the chat. All right. Thank you so much. We can stop the recording.